Golic and Smetty here. Jess was one of the celebrities.
It's not a competition, Mike.
Welcome back to our 500th episode of Golic and Smetty. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see who was listening and may have been shocked to hear that we've done it.
I was like, wow, I knew we've done a lot, but I didn't realize it was that many. Good for us.
It is not. It just seems like that, right, Jess?
Yeah, well, talking to you.
Oh, see that.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I am Mike Golic Sr. She is Jess Matana, also known as Smetty, and a ton certainly to talk about after our get-together last week at our first Golic Foundation golf tournament where you bested me on the one hole that we made. Quick comment back on that you just told me off air that you had made me chocolate chip cookies because we're going to get into your baking and what your specialty is for a July 4th. And you made me chocolate chip cookies, which I ate and then saved for the next morning and ate for breakfast. You gave me some information about them that I did not know.
Yes, the cookies were gluten-free, Mike.
I don't know what gluten-free means, and I don't know if it affects the taste because they were great. So what is gluten-free? I'm sorry, I'm not of that world. I'm not of gluten-free. I don't do vegan. I don't do anything. I just eat. And I don't know if it affects the taste of food because that's the first thing I think about when you talk about different ways to prepare food. How does it affect the taste?
Well, it depends. It totally depends on what you're making. For cookies, I don't think it really affects the taste very much. I just use like a rice flour blend, and I put so much sugar and chocolate, and those cookies actually had tahini in it too. I don't know if you could taste the smoky.
I don't know what tahini is.
Okay, so tahini is like peanut butter, but it's made out of sesame seeds. So those cookies had so much flavor in them, and I think the texture was good. Gluten really affects the texture more than anything, Mike. This weekend, 4th of July weekend, I made a gluten-free peach cobbler.
Oh.
And oh my God, it was so good. I was in a house with two people who have celiac and they don't eat gluten. So
right.
All gluten-free flour. The peaches were perfectly ripe. They were like, I cooked them down into like almost like a peach soup before I put them in it was just like, oh, it was so good.
So when the peach cobbler, I have to have it with ice cream and whipped cream.
Yes.
So was that done?
Vanilla ice cream. Yeah.
Yes, vanilla ice cream.
Mike,
yeah.
actually, I'm curious. I was going to ask your opinion on cobblers because there's a lot of disagreement about the topping of the cobbler. Some people prefer more of like a bready topping. Some people prefer more of like a biscuit topping.
Yep.
And then some cobblers are more of just like cakes. I don't even know if those technically count as cobblers, but what is your favorite cobbler topping?
I like a crumble type of a topping type deal.
Okay.
Yes. Big fan of that.
You like more of like a crisp or a crumble than a cobbler.
Yes. I like that. Listen, I'll go either way, but if you give me a choice, I'd probably go down that road. So that sounds just awesome. But yeah, I have to have ice cream and whipped cream on top. One last question on the cookies that you baked these cookies for me, correct?
Yes, correct.
What made you make them gluten-free?
I had gluten-free flour at my parents' house that weekend, so I just whipped them up, and I think they tasted great. You didn't notice.
No.
Gojo didn't notice. My dad didn't notice. Everyone ate the cookies and had a good time.
It's because at the speed of which we eat them, we may have not time to taste anything different in them. Yeah, we ate a lot, like I said, then we put them in the fridge, and nothing like cold dessert in the morning, whether it's cake, cookies, whatever.
Cobbler is great for dessert.
Absolutely right.
It is cobbler season, Mike. So
it is. We always start these off with my mouth watering. So, but I always like to talk about your baking because I still can't wait for us to be together and do a show while you're baking something. So, real quick. Were you a big 4th of July fireworks person growing up and or into adulthood now where you shot them off and you got them and all that? No?
Fireworks scare me. I think when I was little, my dad had like a near accident with a firework. Like a spark went underneath his ring and it like burned him. And that always freaked me out when I was little. So I'll like touch a spark, like I'll hold the sparkler and I'll do like the ones where you throw them on the ground and they just make a popping noise.
Right.
But we were not, and certainly, Mike, in Illinois, fireworks are illegal.
Right.
And growing up, we didn't really get like the big fireworks and it wasn't until I was older and like lived in Indiana and then like South Carolina where I realized like some states you can just go to the store and get like the big fireworks. Yeah, I lived a very sheltered life in Illinois where we did not have that in our neighborhood.
Well, in Connecticut, where I spent a lot of the kids grew up, and we spent a lot of years, obviously, when I was at the ESPN, they're illegal, but that didn't stop us. You can't let a little.
It stopped me. I was always scared of getting in trouble.
You can't let something like illegal stop you at times, and fireworks was one of the things. My brother Greg actually. Let me throw him under the bus. He would get them from Tennessee or somewhere. So illegally crossing state lines, the whole thing. I mean, we would get these fireworks and go to our friend's house, the Perianos, on July 4th. They'd have a cookout. And Jess, our firework display was almost on par with the town display. I mean, it was, and they lived up like elevated just a little bit. So we would have all the neighbors would end up sitting outside watching our display. And I swear to you, every year and every time we started lighting them off into the sky, me and Mike Periano, the father of the Perianos and the people we go to, would always look at each other like, we're going to get arrested this year. There is no doubt the cops are going to come driving up this driveway because these are too big and too spectacular to not have somebody have call and say, these people are firing off illegal fireworks. Maybe they were enjoying it so much and didn't call because we never got nailed. And I can't believe we never got nailed because these were some of the best backyard fireworks I've ever seen.
Do you still put off any fireworks at your house now?
No, we don't. Once we stopped going there, we don't have the house in Connecticut anymore, so we don't really have that get-together anymore. So there was a decent amount of people then. So now we don't really do it. And the one thing now is we have the dogs at the house. Like we'd be at the Periano, so our dogs would be back at our house. Now it's like we were here, in Indiana at our house here, and firework night, July 4th, and even the days preceding that as well. It's horrible for dogs.
Yeah.
Horrible. Dogs, and you feel so bad. So you're just trying to we're turning the TV up louder so they can't hear it as much. And so now I've gone from let's shoot them off to, will these damn people stop shooting off these fireworks? They're scaring my dogs.
Aw, you're a get off my lawn guy now.
Yeah, now with the fireworks, because, if it affects my dog, it affects me.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm not a firework person so much, but I am a eat dessert, grill some sort of sausage-shaped thing.
There you go.
Maybe a hamburger.
Yeah.
4th of July themed baked goods. I'm all in for that.
So we all ate well. We all drank well. Hopefully everybody enjoyed themselves as much as they could. The sporting world, though, never stops, as we know. And the big thing going on right now, Jess, is we see it every year. We see the money going around in the NBA. It's just amazing. The cap went up to $123 million for a 15-person roster at a sport that makes over $10 billion. Some of the deals: Bradley Beal, $251 million. Devin Booker, $221. John Morant, $226. Nikola Jokic signed the biggest deal ever, 5 years, $264 million. Karl Anthony Towns, $224. Zion Williamson, who has been hurt. I mean, we see the potential there. He signs a 5-year, $193 million deal. And it is just amazing the amount of money floating around in the NBA and all that. And it's not even the biggest story. It's still Kevin Durant.
Right, of course. Kevin Durant owns 4th of July weekend.
Yes, he does.
Like whenever I think of our nation's birthday, I just think about Kevin Durant now because there's always something going on with him. So I don't know, Mike, where do you think he will end up after free agency?
And for those wondering why she was saying 4th of July, it was years ago on 4th of July when he decided he was going to Golden State.
Yeah.
With the Golden State Warriors. In the Hamptons, right? Wasn't he in the Hamptons?
Yes.
Everybody was coming to him. He was sitting on a throne and everybody was coming to him and giving him their gifts and say, please come to our team.
And I say that because it's fun for basketball fans to be like, oh, wow, news on the weekend. I'm with all my friends and family. We can talk about Kevin Durant. But if you work in sports media, what happens is everyone who works for any media website or runs a social media team or has to, do podcasts or whatever, they all end up working on the 4th of July. So, some people do resent Kevin Durant for that, but I don't think, people who talk about sports for a living, it's also not a terrible job. So
no, it's not. It's not. And you
can't
get
feel
content.
too bad for them.
No, you really can't. As far as the teams, on DraftKings, you look at some of the odds there. The top team at -125 is the Phoenix Suns. The Raptors, which gets talked about more and more, Jess, are +250. And the third team is staying with the Nets at +700. Because everybody is expecting Durant to go and then Kyrie to go, and maybe to go back up with LeBron with the Lakers. We'll wait and see on that. But while the Suns are the favorite, it seems the Raptors have been getting some love in this, and maybe you might end up their way. Are you of the Stugotz realm that Kevin Durant really hasn't done anything yet because he hasn't won a championship kind of on his own? But nobody wins a championship on their own anymore. He went and won 2 with Golden State and was the MVP both times. But and Stugotz isn't the only one. There are others that don't give him credit because he's just kind of jumping from team to team. And everybody was ready to give him credit in Brooklyn. That could have been one of the most underachieving put-together teams of all time with Kyrie, with Harden, and Durant.
Because he still wouldn't have gotten credit if they won a championship there, because he also wasn't, quote-unquote, doing it on his own. Like, no matter what, I think there are people who are going to not give Kevin Durant credit, even though, to me, he's one of the best basketball players that I've ever seen play.
Yes.
But no, Stugotz and I do differ in our opinions there. I give him one, and I think he's a great player. So whoever he ends up with is going to have an instantly better team.
So and no doubt about it, wherever he goes, they're going to be a favorite. But so say he ends up in Phoenix. Now, depending on who Phoenix has to give up, because we're going to talk about another trade where a ton was given up. I mean, you have Ayton, you have Devin Booker, who is a superstar. You have Chris Paul certainly coming to the end of his career. Now, would they all stay there? I'm certain the Suns would like to keep them all because they would I would think, almost be the favorite if they kept those guys right out of the gate and added Kevin Durant. That's what you wonder. Is Kevin Durant ever going to get his due? Because wherever he goes, save maybe the Raptors, there's going to be a couple of other, superstars that he's playing with as well.
Well, there's just a lot of superstars in the NBA, I guess. Why wouldn't you go somewhere where you have the best chance to win a championship? I think anyone would do that.
Well, anyone would do that now. That's where all the old timers say they wouldn't do it back then. Bird would never leave Boston and team up. Now, listen, Bird also played with other great Hall of Famers as well.
Right, and so did Michael Jordan.
Yeah, Michael Jordan would leave. Kobe wouldn't leave, even though he did that whole public thing about trading to Chicago, but, stays obviously in LA. They all played with other stars and they all won with other stars, right? Even though for Kobe, when he broke up from Shaq because he wanted to win one or some on his own, he actually did. I think Paul Gasol was his main guy then. So I think that's it. That's what a lot of the old timers are getting, and you see timers. You see it now. You see Durant and Charles Barkley going at it a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, Kyrie now and Stephen A are going at it a little bit. It gets pretty wild what's happening. But I do, Jess, try not to be one of those old guys on the porch where Shaq even said, about how does a guy like, what was it, Rudy Gobert get all that money, that he got, or I think it was Rudy, might have been one other player. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was, how does he get all that money? That's just the way it is. I will never be mad at the times where players get all that money. Will I be a little jealous? Sure. I would have liked to have made that money, but I will never say, oh, this guy doesn't deserve that money or these players don't deserve that money. Oh, that's bullshit, man.
Hold on, Mike. I think we have some breaking news during our recording. This will be old news by the time that people listen to this, but the Panthers are acquiring Baker Mayfield from the Browns for a 2024 conditional 5th-round draft pick. Sources tell Rap Sheet and Tom Pelissero.
Oh my God. Okay. This is wild. So this is a new world for me, Jess, and I don't even know how to deal with it because I'm used to doing 6 to 10 in the morning live. So when we had breaking news, it was breaking news live. You are now breaking news as it's happening, but
and it's not really live.
Nobody will be you'll be hearing this until this is like a day old. So this is really weird to me. What are the terms again?
It said for a 2024 conditional 5th round draft pick. And the Browns are playing the Panthers week 1.
Well, what's going to be interesting is going to be, is he going to be handed the starting job? Is Sam Darnold going to be? Is it going to be an open competition? Because these are both guys that are playing, if memory serves, playing on their 5th-year option. I think Darnold's is like $20 million and Baker's is like almost $19 million, so right around the same. We were wondering when this was going to happen, and we were wondering what it was going to take and who the cat and mouse game between now reports had come out that Seattle was never really interested. They're going with Geno Smith and Drew Lock. Blessings to you on that
Interesting.
one. Yeah. Can we say rebuild, because that's what you're doing. And in Carolina, I never thought the future quarterback was on the roster right now either, and I still may not think that with Baker Mayfield, but you're going to get a competition there now between Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. So somebody finally blinked and said, okay, we have to make a move, because I was just reading a report about how for the Browns, if Baker stayed on the roster, and between Baker and the $45 million signing bonus Deshaun Watson got, and if they didn't play Baker Mayfield, even when Deshaun was suspended, it would be like $64 million of quarterback not on the field for the Cleveland Browns, which would be unbelievable.
It looks like, according to Mike Garofalo, the Browns will pay Baker $10.5 million this season, which means they trimmed over $8 million in cash and salary cap space. The Panthers will pay Mayfield around $5 million, and so Baker agreed to trim $3.5 million off his base salary.
So the big thing there, and probably why it wasn't done earlier, because from what I understand, the first offer around was the Browns saying they'd pay about $3 million. And wouldn't pay any more than $3 million, and that was going to be the big hang-up, because again, especially for Carolina, they're paying Darnold already, so they wanted to get that number down, and they obviously did. Now only paying Baker, as you mentioned, a little over $5 million a year. So personally, I think Baker will win that starting job, and I think he'll be the starting quarterback. Where that goes, I have no idea. It's a guy who's looked good at times, looked bad at times.
Been hurt at times,
Been hurt at times. That's exactly right. So he's covered the gambit. He's done it all. So where is he and what is he? But these are both guys, both Darnold and Baker both know they're in their 5th-year option year. This is the last year before they can hit free agency. So they both know, I got to play to show what I can do. So whoever loses that starting job is going to be in a tough position being a backup.
Mike, this was a great exercise in me throwing breaking news at you. I think from now on in every episode, I'm just going to make something up and see what you can do on the fly. Like, you are such a pro. You just pull all these numbers and salary cap numbers out of your butt. Like, I would need to read at least like 10 minutes worth of prep to have some on the fly perspective on the quarterback battle in Carolina to deliver a take like that. That was very excellently done.
So here's the difference. Your generation loves the numbers and making sure you have the numbers and the research. My generation says bullshit with conviction. We have no idea if my numbers are right, but I said them so
fair.
well that you believed them, right? So you bought into what I was saying because of how, with the veracity and the conviction that I said.
Oh yeah, I have no idea how to even fact check that. I guess I got to go on like Sport Track or whatever that.
There
website
you go.
is
But
and look
I'm
up
basically right though. So I mean.
No, I think you are basically right. I think.
Wow.
We've been waiting for
to
see what was going to happen with Baker Mayfield. Obviously, we don't yet know what Deshaun Watson's suspension will be. He's been accused of sexual misconduct of over 20 women. There are 24 who filed civil suits. 20 of them have settled. 4 of them have not settled yet. The disciplinary hearing with the NFL was last week. It ended on Thursday, so it was after we were done recording last week's episode.
Right.
And it sounds like we may not have an answer on what his punishment will be from the league for weeks to months. This is the first time that the NFL has had this new disciplinary hearing system as part of the current CBA, the one that was just agreed on last year, where Roger Goodell is not handing out the punishment. There's an independent arbiter who's hearing the case and who the NFL is going to make a recommendation to on what the suspension will be. The NFL has said publicly they want an indefinite suspension, minimum being a year.
Yep.
Obviously, the players' union is going to fight that. I don't think they're going to want indefinite suspension to be a precedent that they want to set for any player. So we don't know when we're going to find out what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson as a football player who's going to start for the Browns this season, et cetera. But it sounds like Baker Mayfield, whether it was him deciding, I feel slighted that they signed a new quarterback. I don't want to stick around and find out if I'm going to be playing because this guy that they brought in is going to be suspended, or, I just will take my chances somewhere else. We don't exactly know how that went down, but it sounded like the relationship between him and the Browns has been fractured since the week of the Deshaun Watson signing earlier this summer. Is that right?
I think you're completely right. So two things, one from Baker's side and one from the Brown side. So from Baker's side, Baker is an emotional guy. He wears it on his sleeve, no doubt about it. And I think he was stung, obviously, when they got Deshaun Watson. So he said, screw you, I'm done with you. And then it was all coming out and I also think he thought he was going to be sought after more. When all of a sudden we started seeing quarterback after quarterback go to different teams, and Baker wasn't one of them. Mm-hmm. When all of a sudden you're sitting at home at quiet time going, oh shit, did I kind of overvalue myself here because no one's coming after me? And it turns out Carolina was interested, but they were waiting till the price was right. They weren't just going to grab you and say, we'll pay your 18 mil. They were going to wait till, like they are now from this report, only paying $5 million. So that's a bit of an ego hit as well. So he knows he has to repair that and play better, as Darnold does as well. As I said, I think he will end up being the starter there. And this is one where Matt Rule has to win. Matt Rule is without question the first coach on the hot seat as we go into the season, without question. So we'll see where that one goes. As far as the Browns, because Baker could have taken the side of, I'm not going to be ticked off. I know for a fact, we all know, Deshaun Watson is not going to play some games. I personally do not think he will play this year. I think he will be out the entire year. So Baker could have still been the starter here, a lame duck starter. But as I said, you're on the field, you're leading the team. And quite honestly, he had a better offense to lead in Cleveland than he will in Carolina. Now, he does have Christian McCaffrey, who's back from injury, but Cleveland has probably the best 1-2 duo punch of running backs in the league with Chubb and Kareem Hunt. You picked up Amari Cooper. You paid David Njoku a lot of money. You have one of the top 3 offensive lines in the game, and your defense is really good. So I think he would have, but I don't think his ego could have handled saying, yeah, I'm just going to kind of be the guy here until their new guy gets off a suspension and takes over this team. I know I'm not going to be the quarterback. So I didn't think he was ever going to be able to do that. So it's going to fall on Jacoby Brissett. And Jacoby Brissett, I tell you, Jess, I don't think that's an awful thing, because what you need when you have a really good running game, which they're going to have, they could have a good passing game and you have a really good defense, is you need a quarterback that doesn't make mistakes. And you look at seasons when Brissett, and again, I'm doing this off of memory a little bit, but I think every time he started double-digit games in his career, he never threw double-digit interceptions. So he wasn't a turnover guy. So that's what you need when you have a good running game, a good defense. You need a manageable quarterback, which is what Brissett will be, and they hate when they're called that. But that's what you need, and not turn the ball over. So they could still do pretty well. We'll see. You're dealing with Cincinnati, and we'll see what a revamped Pittsburgh
The Ravens have Kyle Hamilton now on their defense.
Yes, they do.
He'll probably be catching interceptions. Yeah, Mike, I mean, it's a completely unprecedented situation with what Deshaun Watson has been accused of, and with the Browns giving him this massive guaranteed signing this summer. And so I truly, it's hard for me to even wrap my mind around what's going on. And I don't even really know how to talk about it, because, we want to cover the football side of it too, but also we want to make sure that we're, paying attention to the actual victims and the people who are alleging the conduct against Deshaun Watson. So yes, not sure what's going to happen with him, but it does seem like the ripple effect of him being signed in Cleveland, which I certainly did not see coming, is now going to, keep rippling across the league, as now Baker Mayfield will be starting in Carolina.
What's interesting too, you mentioned, we can't forget about the victim side of this. And I was happy to hear in the investigation by the league, they did interview some of the victims. something, that we hadn't heard.
Well, the Browns admitted that they didn't interview any of the
which is
victims
unbelievable. I mean, but
before
again,
they signed Watson. Yeah. And Mike, they also, so like, I'm not, privy to the NFL's investigation. I don't know who they interviewed. We don't know which people they talked to, what those people were alleging, because there's certainly like a range of misconduct that Watson's been accused of. And so we don't exactly know whose stories the NFL has heard on that side of things. And we also, like I said, it's unprecedented. This sort of disciplinary process has never been used before by the NFL. And I also think that it's important to note that the NFL has such in my opinion, a bad track record with dealing with these situations, that if there are women who they reached out to who didn't want to cooperate, and I don't know if that's true, because they didn't want to have to be involved in what certain victims had called victim blaming line of questioning in Jenny Rentis's reporting last summer, then I would understand that. So we really do not know what to expect, because we don't know who the NFL has talked to, what those people say happened with them and Watson. All we know is that it might be weeks before we find out. So I don't know if this indicates that there's any sort of expectation from the Browns that there will or won't be a suspension. But I think it certainly indicates that, Baker Mayfield just did not want to stick around and find out.
Yeah, he did not want to. And again, personally, I've said it. I think Deshaun Watson will miss the year. Again, if they try indefinite, I agree with you. The union will appeal. Though it's been interesting on some of these really bad situations where the union hasn't appealed and said, you know what, we just want this kind of to be done, and we're not going to jump into this. So I'll be interested, depending on what the punishment is, of the union stepping in and appealing. So I love this, that when you listen, when this podcast is posted and you're listening to it, you're going to hear Jess talk about breaking news. Understand, she had it first. She had it first. Yes,
well,
you did.
I guess Rap Sheet had it first. But then I had it first, and then you had it second.
You read it first. How about that? Yeah,
I
there you go.
appreciate that.
Good
well,
job.
I think we officially answered the age-old question of what's better, NFL free agency or NBA free agency.
Yeah, I don't think it's close, right? I don't think it's close at all. So the NBA, we'll keep going with that. Obviously, we gave you a lot of the numbers out there, but the big question is going to be, where is Kevin Durant going to end up? As I said a little earlier, in DraftKings, you want some odds on that? The Suns are the favorite at -125, Raptors next at +250, and Nets staying with the Nets at +700. Jess, I know we're going to get into college football because the world is the seismic shift going on is amazing, but I know you do that with Spencer Hall. You do the F1 podcast.
Yes.
And we've talked about how into F1 I'm getting as well. You had the race up in what was it, the British Grand Prix. How very cool that Carlos Sainz gets his first win, right? His 150th. This was his 150th race.
Yeah.
He's been on the podium before, never with a win, and he gets a win. So I thought that was very cool.
I don't know if you saw the picture that Formula One posted after the race of Carlos Sainz's dad, who was also a race car driver, kissing Lewis Hamilton's dad on the cheek.
Oh, yeah.
And then Tom Cruise was just standing right next to him.
Yeah.
It was so bizarre. But yeah, Mike, I don't know if you saw the whole race, but there was a massive crash.
Scary, too.
Yeah. That was the first time that we talked about this with Gojo and Spencer on Sunday, but that was the first time that I really, as a new fan of the sport, was like, holy shit, this is really dangerous. I was pretty freaked out after that, but luckily all the drivers that were involved in that ended up being okay, and they credited some of the new safety.
The halo. I mean, the halo that goes.
The halo.
Yeah, because the one car was sliding on its top, and the halo saved.
So scary.
Yeah, I mean that was horrific.
But Mike, I'm also not sure if you saw this, because I think the crash kind of overshadowed it. But there were protesters who ran onto the track during the first lap, and if there hadn't been a safety car, which means that all the drivers had to slow down, there may have been an even worse incident, because protesters who I believe were protesting big oil ran onto the track and were on the track. And oh my God,
that could have been
can't
horrific.
think of a more terrifying place to be. Having just gone to the race in Miami, and I was on the grid for like maybe 2 minutes before the W Series race, it was terrifying being around those cars. It's loud, it's scary.
Yeah.
They go really fast. I just don't understand, putting people in danger. Not to mention like yourself, but also the people who work the events and the drivers.
The protesting, they believe in their cause. If they're going to go do what they're going to do. I mean, I'm glad nobody got hurt.
Me too.
There, but and quickly we should mention it was the Alfa Romeo driver, and I have a horrible time.
Zhou Guan Yu.
Thank you very much. He was the one who flipped over. It was a bad right out of the gate.
Yeah.
It was right first turn, I believe, right? And he is sliding on basically would have been sliding on his head had Formula Car mandated the halo in 2018.
Right.
That absolutely saved his life. I mean, absolutely.
Right. And there have been a number of, there was also an F2 crash earlier in the same day where a driver drove over top of another car, and the same safety mechanism kind of saved the other driver. And I think, I wasn't obviously like as big of a fan of the sport when they implemented this new safety feature, but I remember there was some, pushback from people who were longtime fans of the sport saying that like it kind of ruins the aesthetic of the car, and like they didn't want to do it, and there was so much like aversion to it, and it's proven time and time again to be so important. And and I wonder like what things are we not doing in football, which is another really dangerous sport, that seem like no-brainers, that people are kind of like stuck in, this is how it is and this is how we like it, and we're just kind of continuing to put people at risk instead of implementing some common sense safety measures.
Well, the biggest thing there, Jess, is the helmet. I mean, we were, from when I learned to play to people before me to people just right after me, you were taught to lead with your helmet. And so the smart thing we're doing now is trying to take that away from the game. And that's one of the reasons I'll go off tangent a little bit here, that I'm on the board for USA Football, for youth football, in the way they're teaching tackling now. Tackling's horrible in the NFL and college. And the next, or maybe the first good tackling you're going to see in a while is when this next group of little kids, which anybody who played in the NFL, we all played Little League football. When this next group comes through up to the NFL, because they're learning to tackle the right way, to keep your head out of it a little more. Watch rugby. I mean, these guys don't have helmets on, and they tackle well because they use their arms. They keep their head off to the side. And Pete Carroll has made videos on this with Seattle and teaching that way. And that's what's going to happen. But we have been programmed, Jess, for years to lead with our helmet and use our helmet. It was a helmet for protection. We used it as a weapon. And so years ago, when they were started to make the crossover to say we're going to take the helmet out of the game, that was toughest for the players who were in the game, who had already learned to use their helmet. Now they had to take it out, which is a tough thing to just say, oh yeah, next game I just won't use my head anymore. It's just hard to do. So that's the best thing. Obviously, they're doing other things, less contact in practice, so not the constant hitting all the time. But one of the main things is really taking that head and that missile, out of tackling, and hopefully they can.
And like it sounds.
Hold on one sec.
Go ahead.
Just broke it. Okay. I was gonna say break there. Hold on a sec. My wife just stuck her head in and said, "Baker to the Panthers."
I love that. She should bill us a fee for producing this episode.
She's always been a field producer my entire 20-some years in this business.
All I was gonna say, as we segue into college football realignment, which I think is like the story of the day we want, or of the week we want to cover, is like everything you just said about tackling and helmets. It sounds like complete common sense, and yet there are still people who think that it's soft and it's changing the nature of the game, and everyone's so sensitive these days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you make a compelling case, so we'll just ignore those people.
Yeah, we need to, because that's what they do. Well, you get it everywhere. You get it in the old-time basketball players saying there's not enough physicality. You drive the lane like that back in my day.
Oh, back in my day, we used to. It's like, okay, back in your day, like pregnant women smoked cigarettes and were prescribed like heroin for body aches. Like science and knowledge has progressed.
So the one thing I will, and I always say, is there are some old school things that could still hold in today. It's not like you completely forget some of the old school ways in today's world, but it's just got to be more of a mixture. It can't be, it's got to be that way or it's got to be this way. There's room for both. There's room for both as long as it can move in a positive direction, which I think, Jess, a lot of people are asking, is college football moving in a positive direction? The latest out there being UCLA and USC are going to join the Big Ten in a couple of years after we had the report last year of Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC in a couple of years. And now it seems like where we all thought this was going is now maybe going there at warp speed, where we have just a couple of super conferences and the ground of college football is changing.
Yeah, well, let's go back a few days. So Thursday, the news broke that UCLA and USC are joining the Big Ten. So what was your first reaction to that when you heard it?
My first reaction was that we're heading to exactly what I just said. Probably two super conferences between the SEC and the Big Ten, which just domino affects so many things. What happens to the Pac-12, who kept changing their name as they were adding people? It used to be the Pac-8 long time ago. What happens to the Big 12? What happens to the ACC? Where do these different conferences go? And how about that alliance? How about that alliance that we mocked, rightfully so, between the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC after the SEC was going to get Oklahoma and Texas, how they're going to work hand in hand. Ha! As we said, you're going to work hand in hand until a deal becomes too good for one of the conferences, and they're going to say, screw you, we're out. And that's the Big Ten, who are now adding two Pac-12 teams.
Yeah, I think all of those reactions are they make sense. My reaction was like, maybe I'm just a dumbass, was like, wow, that's a really far way to fly if you're like the women's soccer team at UCLA. Like, what are they going to do? Like, this is clearly, because of the football conferences and because of this alleged like $1 billion rights deal that the Big Ten's going to get now with either Fox or Apple, whoever ends up winning this bidding war. And that just jacked up the price even more. But like, for the quote unquote student athletes in the, quote unquote non-revenue generating sports, like, I really wonder how this is going to work just logistically.
They're an afterthought because of the money, which is normal, right? I mean, that's something that hasn't changed. It's not like when all these big decisions are made, they're saying, okay, how is this going to affect the lacrosse team? They may want to sound like they care, but they're going to make the deal that brings in the most money, and then they're going to figure out how the women's USC and UCLA volleyball team, is flying to Rutgers. For
crazy.
What do they say? One of those trips from the West Coast to Rutgers is like Rutgers going to Iceland or something like that. So, the travel is going to be a little bit more difficult, but you can't pass up the money. As you mentioned,
they'll figure it out.
It's going to be close to $1 billion. That's just the TV deal as far as money being split to the different teams. So the money is going to be ridiculous, but it opens up so many other questions about what happens to everybody else. And then certainly, Jess, what happens to our alma mater of Notre Dame?
The big question, Mike, of the day. What happens to Notre Dame? So you're obviously of a different generation where I think the independent, pride of Notre Dame maybe is like a little bit stronger than like the students that were my age at Notre Dame. But I want to hear from your perspective. Like, would you be disappointed or feel, a little sad and upset if Notre Dame did actually finally join a conference in football?
Zero sadness, zero upset, none. We were doing our family podcast, sorry in advance, and obviously our family, we all, I went there, my wife went to St. Mary's, Mike and Jake played football at Notre Dame, Sydney swam at Notre Dame, and we asked that question as well. And not one of us cared. Not one bit. No, because we care about Notre Dame. We don't care about it. Notre Dame and independent and being independent aren't mutually, we don't have to, doesn't have to be with the other, right? Yeah. We love Notre Dame and wants what's good for Notre Dame. And if it means being in a conference and not being independent, then be in a conference. I've said this all along anyway, that Notre Dame will stay independent as long as they can. And right now it still works. Especially if you expand the playoffs, they'll have an easier shot of making the playoffs as an independent. They wouldn't have one of the top seeds because that would go to conference champs, but they would have an easy shot of getting in. As long as they can do that and make their money, they'll stay independent. But if all of a sudden the money becomes ridiculous, and make no mistake, that's what these colleges look at. If it becomes ridiculous, then they have to think long and hard about it. And it would be the Big Ten. Anybody in the ACC who thinks Notre Dame would join they're not going to join the ACC.
Definitely not. If they wanted to join the ACC, they would have done it. They would have done it 3 years ago, I think, before they inked the ESPN deal. And I'm very glad they didn't. And I have to give credit to Jack Swarbrick and whoever else kind of saw that. This going full in on the ACC wasn't a great long-term solution, because there's a couple things that have changed now, Mike, like you mentioned. Now one of Notre Dame's biggest rivals is in the Big Ten. So if they do join the Big Ten, they'll be able to still schedule along the lines of what they've already been scheduling. You can still play USC. You can play your rivals in the Big Ten, Northwestern, Michigan State, Purdue.
Ohio State. I mean, think of the rivalries. Notre Dame could keep going there with either every year or every other year. I mean,
and it's access to the playoff. If Notre Dame were to join the ACC like they did in 2020, the ACC just hasn't been a competitive football conference the way that the SEC or even the Big Ten has been. I mean, and like the Big Ten hasn't even been that great, and USC hasn't even been that great. I think this is like, we're as we talk about USC as being like a big boon for the Big Ten. It's not that they're a great football program right now. They haven't been for years.
Right. It's a great market.
They're a big brand, and it's a big market. And I think the Big Ten is smart, and they're acquiring two big brands. UCLA has men's basketball, which is huge. Like I mentioned earlier, they have one of the best women's soccer team in the country. And obviously they don't care as much about women's sports and the non-revenue generating sports. But those are things that the Big Ten, I'm sure, looked at and saw as money-making opportunities. And same with, USC. Obviously, they have, legendary players there. They've won national championships. I am one thing that does make me, gives me a tinge of sadness is like, what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl now?
Yeah. Well, the Rose Bowl has been trying to hang on to be the Rose Bowl, but in the playoff edition, it's a little bit tougher. And you just have to think everything's going to change. And you just have to understand, because, and the one thing I don't think will happen, Jess, I don't think the product on the field is going to be affected. No. Because listen, this isn't the first time teams have moved conferences. This has happened a bunch. This has happened before. Now, the magnitude of which is happening now is unprecedented. But I think people are always going to love their colleges. And even if you don't have the Texas-Oklahoma rivalry at the Big 10 to 12 anymore, they're over in the SEC. You could still get Notre Dame and USC. But even if you even didn't, it's not like people are going to say, I'm done watching my college team play. That's never going to happen.
I've seen some people say that sort of thing, like media members say that sort of thing, like if there are two mega conferences and what's left of the Big 12, what's left of the Pac-12 and the ACC, they kind of become like a second tier almost to the main two conferences, to the Big 10 and the SEC. Like eventually fans are just going to stop caring, and they're not going to want to go to games because their team doesn't have a legitimate shot at a national championship. But if you're a fan of Washington State or Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech, or, one of these, Georgia Tech's a bad example because they haven't been very good for a while, but, one of these teams that's like, they haven't really been in the running for a national championship for decades, and they still play and they still have fans. Virginia Tech still sells out games. Like, is there that much of a difference? I think people are really connected to their college football team regardless. And so I understand that point of view, but I don't necessarily think that will change. And I could be wrong, but I think people love college football no matter what.
Look where we are now, Jess. I mean, we basically are talking about 5 or 6 teams each year for the playoffs, right? And then maybe can this one team sneak in? Iowa was undefeated last year. Can they make a run and actually get into the Final Four? Mm-hmm. Can a non-Power 5, get in, which Cincinnati did. So you did see that. So you did see some new things. But what we don't know yet is how the playoff system is going to work. Even if you have 2 super conferences, will they be the only 2 teams involved, the only 2 conferences involved in whatever the playoff will be? Or is it still going to be open to 12 teams where the other conferences will be allowed to go? There's still too many unknowns, but I do think we are heading. And I remember having this battle with Trey Wingo and Gojo when we were doing a show together. They thought all 5 of the big time conferences, the Power Fives, were going to get together and separate. I said that'll never happen because those 5 commissioners will never be able to cede power to one another.
Yeah.
Especially Greg Sankey. You think he's listening to anybody?
Right.
I mean, he's not. He's not. So 5 are not going to do it. 2 you could see. Like we may see with the Big Ten and the SEC.
Maybe 4 and the other 2 are not as strong, but they're larger. So it would be like the Big 12. And there were reports that there were 6 Pac-12 teams that were considering joining the Big 12. And it was like Arizona. Let me look at my
I think it was BYU, Arizona State, Colorado.
Arizona State, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Utah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and BYU just already joined the Big 12.
Already joined the Big 12
with UCF,
right.
Houston, and Cincinnati. So that already makes if hypothetically any of those Big 12 teams left, I think that would make the Big 12 a pretty good conference, not as good as the SEC or the Big 10, but like a solid, conglomerate.
I agree, and that's the race right now, right? Because and quite honestly, now the Big 12 better act quick, and it'll be interesting for Oregon and Washington because they've also been mentioned with the Big 10, but not just yet, right? So if all of a sudden the Big 12 comes a calling to Oregon and Washington, do they go or do they say, you know what? We're going to hold out because we think we may end up in the Big 10. That's going to be interesting because right now it's a race for number 3. What's going to be the third conference? We know it ain't going to be the Pac-12. They're as good as dead.
Right.
They were 5th out of 5 anyway, right?
Yeah.
So it's the ACC and the Big 12, and I'm with you. I lean to the Big 12, who they already got and who they can grab now over from the West. I think they're going to be the ones to build more than the ACC.
And they can have a national footprint. Like they can have a team all the way in West Virginia and teams all the way in Arizona, California, Washington, whatever. So I don't know. And I think the ACC's TV deal is just going to keep them from really growing at the rate that these other deals are going to be up in the next 5 years for the most part. And the ACC's has till 2036 with ESPN, which is like a year that I can't even fathom writing down on a piece of paper because it feels so far into the future. Obviously, Mike, we will blink and we'll be in 2036 and you and I will be doing a podcast with your 12-year-old grandson. But it just feels like it's a far ways away from right now. So the ACC is definitely in a weaker spot. And I think if you're a team like Oregon and you're stuck in, this like broken up Pac-12, like you probably, and especially if you're Notre Dame, like you probably still have some leverage because you're a national brand,
right? And
you have, big boosters, you have people that are going to desire you, even though you kind of left on your back foot at this point and having to react to all of this. It's still probably not a terrible place to be. Where I would be concerned is if you're Miami, Florida State, or Clemson, and you are really good, but you're kind of locked into this deal, then I would be kind of worried because you don't want to get stuck, not being able to grow at the same rate of these other schools that are now going to be getting like $100 million a season from their TV rights deal, and you're only getting like 40 or 50. Like the gap is just going to keep getting wider for you.
You're really going to be testing the courts if it goes that far for teams that want to leave the ACC, including Notre Dame with all their other sports, not football, obviously. If you have to sue or go to court to get out of that deal, right? You're going to have to pay something, but the money, especially a place like Notre Dame, can make up on the other side.
And Notre Dame certainly needs the money because we've never heard of, their multi-billion-dollar endowment. That's the other thing is like there was this report yesterday that UCLA, they were in dire financial straits with their athletic department. And so this morning I was just like, UCLA endowment on Google, and it's like $5 billion. And I'm like, you know what? I don't even understand how money works. What does any of this mean?
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Teams are going to get to where they want to go. It's just a matter of how much they have to pay. Do you think if this scenario, Chris, my wife brought this up, do you think to try and entice Notre Dame to come to the Big Ten would pay some of the money that Notre Dame would have to pay the ACC?
I think it's definitely possible. I don't know the legal ramifications of that, if there are any, but
kind of like a coach's buyout when the boosters get together.
Exactly. Speaking as someone who majored in television, I mean, maybe I should know about legal contracts for deals like this, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't. I think I could see that happening. Or I could see the difference being so high between what Notre Dame gets now and what they can make in even 2 years.
Yep, exactly.
That
Would
they'll
make
just
up
pay
for it.
whatever fee and they don't give a shit because it's a long-term solution and they don't want to be left looking short-sighted at like, oh, we're gonna have to foot the bill for canceling this agreement when, if I think one of the lessons I've learned and watching sports is like, if you're rich, you can kind of do whatever you want. You just have to pay for it. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you're rich, so you can pay for
Right.
it. So, I mean, at the end of this, we know the landscape is changing immensely, but we're both Notre Dame people. I think Jack Swarbrick, the AD, has done a great job with foresight and patience and waiting for the right moment to do whatever is going to happen, whether it's stay independent or eventually, I think, join a conference. I think it's going to work out well for Notre Dame, which Notre Dame has always been a leverage. And people that hate Notre Dame, listen, fine, you go ahead. You say they have all the rules made up for them, blah, 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 blah. Last I checked, the 13 people in the room, aren't from Notre Dame who put them in the playoffs, okay? Right. So, hate all you want. They're in a great position. They're in a leveraging position. And as I've always said, when you have the leverage hammer, you swing it as hard as you possibly can to benefit you.
And I really hope that news doesn't break in like 2 hours that makes this entire conversation irrelevant, because that's how quickly things have changed the last week. So if Notre Dame does join a conference in the next 24 hours, Mike, we might have to just cut out everything we just said for the last
Either that or
minutes.
we'll have to do an emergency podcast.
Yeah,
podcast
emergency
number
Golic and
501,
Smetty.
right? Yeah. I'm going to need sustenance, so you're going to have to bake me something. If you're
All
gonna
right,
wanna
I can do that. I can do that.
And don't make it gluten-free, please. No gluten-free?
I'll decide later.
You just won't tell me, will you?
I won't tell you. You would never know. You don't know
That is
the
true.
difference.
I wouldn't know. I am that dumb.